All right, everybody, I'm showing 1 o'clock, so I want to get us started and give Sara her full time to present. We're really excited to have Sara with us talking about gender and sexual diversity. Um, she came recommended to us from our friends at Behavioral Health, so you've got a good reputation, Sara. People are saying good things about you. We appreciate you giving us your time on a Friday afternoon. I really do appreciate you hanging in. I hope you're at home and at least in a comfortable chair. So, with that said, I will turn it over to Sara Williams from U of L. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. I'm happy to be here. Can you all hear me okay? See me okay? Everything good? Awesome. Like I said, I'm new to Teams, so if there are any problems, just owl screech at me or dinosaur roar or whatever it is you want to do. Get my attention and I will try my best to fix whatever it is. So, as Katie said, my name is Sara Williams. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a certified social worker in the state of Kentucky, and I'm a PhD student at the Kent School of Social Work. My expertise is in the area of gender and sexual diversity and in suicide prevention, and specifically where those two things intersect and interact. So, all of my research involves suicide and suicide prevention within gender and sexually diverse humans, as well as in other populations. And I am happy to be here today just to try to help give you some knowledge that you're seeking and answer any questions that you might have. So just in terms of what we'll be covering today, so you have an idea, we'll be talking about some general key terms and concepts, and we'll go over some statistics and general information just to set the stage. And then we'll talk about some different ways that you can promote inclusion and embrace diversity within your own areas and your own practice. And then I'll give you some resources, and then we'll just have a few minutes to wrap up. I don't know how this will work because I can really only see one participant video at a time for some reason, Teams. But by, I guess, show of hands, how many people feel like you have some experience or knowledge in working with, this like gender and sexual diversity, or know anyone who identifies as gender or sexually diverse? I can see everybody now. Great. All right. Awesome. And how many people feel like you have sort of a little bit of knowledge but would really like to learn more? Okay. And how many of you feel like you have absolutely no idea what anything is about in this area? And that's totally fine. If that's you, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help get you out of that place to hopefully one of those other tiers of at least feeling like you have a little bit of knowledge and feel like you are able to work with people if this is something that comes up. So again, I thank you for being here. Having some weird Teams is like letting me do weird things, but that's okay. So just to kind of give an overview, gender and sexual diversity is an umbrella term that encompasses all individuals whose sexual orientation identity or gender identity are not cisgender and heterosexual. So cisgender and heterosexual are kind of the societal norms. They're what is kind of taken for granted as the default. And cisgender is when you identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. So if the doctor pulled you out and said, oh, it's a boy, and you identify as male, you're cisgender. Heterosexual, more people are familiar with. It's identifying as romantically, sexually attracted to someone of the opposite sex. And again, that is considered kind of the societal norm. And so gender and sexual minorities are anyone who includes anyone who doesn't identify with cisgender and heterosexual. It's both of these terms are kind of interchangeable, but the gender and sexual diversity is the one I prefer, as it tends to be a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more strengths-based. But something that's kind of important to remember always is that the language around gender and sexuality continues to evolve rapidly. Words and their definitions change or become refined as our understanding of complex constructs related to these identities evolves. We recognize that learning which words or phrases are most accurate, respectful, and useful is an important goal, but we also need to understand that it can change rapidly and that that's part of the process as well. Having issues with my earbuds falling out now. Can everyone still hear me? Okay, thank you. Awesome. And so all of these terms that we're going to go over today are accurate up to our current understanding of gender and sexual diversity, but keep in mind that terms become outdated and that there are new terms evolving all the time, and it's important to consider what the individual wants their language to be used as. So this there's a glossary in the handout that Katie put in the chat for us. And so I'm not going to read over all of these, but I am going to kind of go over some of them that are more kind of heard more or used more within either the gender and sexual identity community or within the media. So AFAB, AMAB, or AFAB, AMAB is assigned male or female at birth, and it's used to describe the sex or gender that a person is assigned based on physical characteristics. So again, the doctor pulls you out and you're like, oh, it's a boy, or oh, it's a girl. That would be what the assigned male or assigned female at birth means. Asexual refers to a person who doesn't experience sexual attraction or has very little interest in sexual activity. Sometimes they refer to themselves as aces. Bisexual refers to a person who is emotionally, sexually, or romantically attracted to people of the same and other genders. And bisexual kind of has a few different like subcategories, and pansexual falls within that kind of non-mutually exclusive attraction umbrella. So I already talked about what cisgender means, and cisnormativity is just that kind of assumption that everyone is cisgender, everyone identifies with the sex they were assigned at birth. Coming out of the closet and disclosure are kind of the act or the process of first accepting and identifying within yourself that you might be a gender or sexually diverse identity, and then disclosing or coming out to others. And that can be one person, a few people, all people. It doesn't have to be the entire social network. It could be some. It kind of just depends on the person. Gay refers to someone who is primarily attracted to people of the same gender. This would be called homosexual in the kind of traditional medicalized terminology. Gender is the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a culture associates with a person's assigned sex or biological sex. And so there's things like gender roles and gender expression, and what is defined as feminine or masculine and things like that. Gender expression is an individual's presentation, including their physical appearance, clothing, hair, behavior, communication, that communicates their gender or gender role to the outside world. And that gender expression may or may not conform or align with that person's gender identity. The gender identity is the deeply felt inherent sense of being the gender that you identify with. So boy, girl, gender queer, gender fluid, non-binary, and gender diversity refers to the extent to which kind of just refers to all of the gender identity possibilities. I know this slide's kind of a lot, so bear with me, but the rest of the slides have far fewer words on them, I promise. Heteronormativity refers to the cultural roles and expectations and just that default thinking that everyone is straight. I skipped over a few things, didn't I? Yes, I did. Gender dysphoria is the discomfort or distress that comes from your gender identity not aligning with the gender that you were assigned. Gender queer, gender expansive just kind of refers to experiencing gender outside of the male-female binary. And queer is an umbrella term that is kind of newly, not super newly, but newly since like the 90s being reclaimed by the community. It used to be a very kind of derogatory term, but many people, especially younger people, are adopting queer as an identity term in a way to kind of reclaim the term and to avoid limiting themselves to what may not feel comfortable in terms of the other labels. Yeah. Questioning is also part of the LGBTQ alphabet soup. That's why there's a bowl of alphabet soup here. It's I affectionately refer to it as the alphabet soup model of talking about gender and sexual diversity, because it kind of feels like there's a lot of letters in there and that we still can't really capture everyone's experience. But the LGBTQIAP plus 2S model, or the alphabet soup model, is designed to make sure that people are being included. And so the L in that is lesbian, the G is gay, B is bisexual, T is trans, Q is for queer or questioning. And questioning is kind of debated by some people, but it's important to include because that kind of period of questioning your gender or sexual identity can be very isolating and very distressing. So it's important that we continue to think about questioning as an important part of this group. And in real life, most of us continue questioning everything anyway. So like it makes sense to have the questioning still be there. Sexual orientation kind of just refers to the people that we are attracted to and or have relationships with. And transgender is an umbrella term for anyone whose gender identity doesn't align with cisgender. And so that can include people who are trans men, trans women, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and just anything kind of across that realm. Okay, so I know this slide is a lot. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? I see hands up. Are these hands up for questions or are they still up? Pansexual, yes. So pansexual is one that kind of a lot more people are identifying with these days. And it essentially refers to the attraction to a person regardless of gender. And so there's been kind of a debate as to whether or not bisexual or pansexual is more inclusive, but they're both inclusive. Pansexual is more, I'm attracted to you whether or not your gender is, you know, whatever it is. And bisexual is, I'm attracted to you as a woman or as a man. And so the bisexual typically can include aspects of gender, whereas pansexual is just kind of across the board. I'm not limiting myself in any way to who I can find a connection with. And so really they're very similar, but it kind of just really depends on the person, whichever they feel more comfortable with and identifying them. And also, just kind of anecdotally, I've noticed that a lot of pan people use the word queer to identify their sexual orientation in kind of just a more broad sense. And so pansexual is not the fun joke that people are attracted to, like kitchen utensils. I just think it's funny, so I continue to like say it. But it is kind of the attraction to a human, regardless of the label. Or as like David Rose puts it, I like the wine, not the label. Schitt's Creek is just always a perfect go-to reference for me. Did that help, Peg? Is that a solid answer? Any other questions before we move out of the alphabet soup slide? Okay, awesome. So these are just a little bit more detailed definitions of gender identity, and it's a person's deeply felt inherent sense of being a boy, man, male, girl, woman, or female, or an alternative gender, which may or may not correspond to their assigned sex at birth. And since gender identity is internal, it's something that we can't see, it's not necessarily visible to others. So the affirmed gender identity refers to a person's gender identity after coming out as a trans or gender nonconforming person, or after undergoing social or medical transitioning processes to where they are now living as their gender identity. I just noticed a typo in this slide, and I have used this slide so many times, and now I'm mad about it, but that's fine. Just nobody pay attention. Sexual orientation identity is a component of identity that includes a person's sexual, emotional, and romantic attraction to another person and the behavior that may result from that attraction. Sexual orientation is distinct from sex, gender identity, gender role, and expression, and it exists on a continuum or a matrix or constellation or a nebula. It's not just kind of in these little boxes, and that identity can fluctuate throughout one's life. So sexual orientation itself may not change or fluctuate, but how one identifies and how one recognizes it may change or fluctuate. And so especially when working with youth, it's important to remember that people change and that we don't always understand our sexual orientation or gender identity like as soon as we understand that we might be queer or trans. It's a process for everyone, and the process doesn't look the same for everybody. And a lot of younger kids feel a lot of pressure to kind of pick a label or pick something to identify with. And I think this is part of the kind of pressure that kids feel anyway, to like choose a path and choose it early and stick to it. Like majors in high school seems bizarre to me, because how does anyone know what they want to do that young? But the kind of important part to reinforce with kids who might be questioning or just in general exploring their gender identity or sexual orientation identity is that you don't have to pick a label, and you don't have to kind of make yourself fit into one of these boxes if that doesn't fit you. The gender unicorn is 100% my best friend. Okay, not really. I have actual friends. I don't spend all of my time doing these presentations. But for real, like the gender unicorn is my homie. He's in there. The gender unicorn is in that PDF packet, so you can print it out and hang it up in your office or classroom or wherever it is that you're going to be looking at it or people are going to be looking at it. And it's basically just a handy dandy way to kind of visually explain or visually represent how all of these components fit together. So the gender identity is the kind of first one with a little rainbow up here. And that's kind of in your brain or heart. You know, it's deeply felt and inherent, and it's not something that is kind of under your control. It's what is there. And so that is kind of the top one. And then the gender expression with the little green dots, just that's how you're portraying your gender to the world, whether that be femininity, masculinity, somewhere in between, something completely different. The sex assigned at birth is the little DNA things. And that is, again, based on physiological and biological characteristics, but typically just the doctor looking at the kind of genital region and identifying a sex in that moment. And then we've got physical and emotional attraction. And those are the things that kind of comprise sexual orientation identity. So again, gender unicorn, super awesome. I keep it printed out and hang it in like every office I ever go to. Kids like it, adults like it. Who doesn't love a unicorn? Especially like a purple unicorn. It's the best. And so over the past, I don't know, 50, 30, 20, 10 years, those are kind of the increments that our understanding of sex and gender have evolved. There's been just a philosophical change in our way of looking at sex. It's more of a balance or a whole systems view instead of just identifying genetics, chromosomes, gonads, and hormones. They're not just XX, XY. We don't have a specific number of testosterone that you have to produce or estrogen that you have to produce. These different sex characteristics exist across an entire spectrum. There are many different differences in sex development, there are as many as 1 in 100 people have some form of difference in sex development. And that can include things like having intersex conditions or having, you know, imbalanced hormone production or anything like that. And just in general, we need to recognize again that people are not, they can't just be into these little boxes. People's experiences and bodies and conditions exist in myriad, infinite ways. And so it's really been more of a moving away from this traditional thinking of male versus female to there are a lot of different expressions and variations within sex development. And there's just in general this societal terror of gender nonconformity, which is best evidenced, if you ask me, by the blazing wildfires that were caught on the West Coast last year because of a gender reveal party in which people felt it necessary to, you know, start a wildfire just to say the gender of their baby. And again, gender is a construct and it's something that we feel inside. And so really, you're just announcing the genitals of your baby to the world. And I'm sorry if gender reveal parties are your thing. I just really don't like them. And it reinforces the gender binary and it starts socializing kids before they're even born and telling them that they have to fit into these societal expectations of masculine or feminine, or that they're not valid and they're not going to fit in. And so what this does is it tells people with differences in sex development or people who are gender nonconforming that it's not okay that they exist. So much so that, you know, historically people with people born with any kind of intersex conditions would have to undergo surgery to normalize genitals before any sex characteristics had a chance to develop. And this frequently kind of ended up in the doctor slash parents making the wrong decision and the child identifying with a gender that was not chosen for them when they were born. So it basically just, you know, this kind of very rigid sense of what's appropriate for a boy and what's appropriate for a girl and those things is really ostracizing to people, not only people who are gender nonconforming or trans, but to people who don't fit into those kind of traditional categories of femininity and masculinity. So just to give some numbers, just so you have some context, in the US, there are about 2 million youth who identify as LGBT, and those are age 13 to 17. So there are a few more younger and of course more older. Of those, about 150,000 identify as trans and the rest identify as cisgender. And of those participants, of the 2 million, a vast majority of them identify as queer. 1.924 million identify as queer, which in this case is also LGBT. And no, just LGBT. Goodness. Queer on this slide just means sexual orientation. So sexual orientation identity. And then giving you numbers just for our beautiful state of Kentucky, there are about 27,000 reported self-identified LGBT youth. And of those, a little less than 2,000 are trans, and about 26,000 identifies queer or as a sexual minority. And so, as you can probably guess, these numbers are probably pretty low, right? Like people aren't always just like jumping at the bit to tell you this stuff, especially when you're you're a kid, and especially when you're in an environment that may not accept or affirm what you're telling them. So gender and sexually diverse people and kids are at way greater risk of experiencing health and social disparities. They are the numbers on this slide are actually fairly low estimates, but they're more likely to report depression and anxiety. They're more likely to be victims of interpersonal violence, more likely to develop body image or eating disorders and have substance abuse and risky behaviors. Sexual minorities and especially gender minorities are more likely to experience family rejection and other negative social outcomes that are associated with that, and more physical health risks like cancers, cardiovascular diseases, and sexually transmitted infections. Additionally, gender and sexually diverse people are way more likely to experience suicidal ideation and to attempt suicide. Even within those groups, there are some kind of disparities. Bisexual individuals or people who are questioning or have non-exclusive sexual orientation identities have the lowest level of emotional well-being among all minority sexual orientations. They have higher levels of non-suicidal self-injury and suicidal ideation. And they have a unique experience with stigma and discrimination because not only are they kind of disparaged and marginalized from society at large, but then they're also experiencing this discrimination and stigma within the LGBTQ community. Bisexual individuals and people who identify with those minority sexual orientation identities frequently experience ostracization and just rejection from other members of the GSD community. In addition to that, trans individuals have the highest rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD, and the highest rates of discrimination and victimization, and the highest rates of suicidality among any groups. So it's really, really important that we recognize that, because I mean, like 50% of trans kids will have attempted suicide before they're 18. And that is the most heartbreaking thing I've ever heard in my entire life, y'all. 50%, largely because of the way that our society is set up. It's set up for cisgender heterosexual people, and it is fully rejecting of people who don't fit into those. And so a lot of this injustice that comes from these societal, structures of oppression and discrimination are contributing to these mental health outcomes and contributing to just overall distress and self-hate and putting up barriers for people with gender and sexually diverse identities. There are, identity-related stressors that are shown to be more specifically, sorry, I keep getting like notifications in my earbud and it's throwing me off. I don't know why that's happening. I'm sorry. That's why I just keep like pausing and looking. But if y'all aren't hearing that, then that's fine. I can just ignore it. And so identity-related stressors, or things that are specifically related to one's identity. So experiencing things like being constantly exposed to the trans military ban or the trans healthcare bans, or all of the different policies and legislature that are happening right now among states that are trying to ban trans athletes from sports, or seeing about the Pulse victimization where 42 people were killed solely because of their gender and sexual identity, and things like that, and hearing, negative comments about gender and sexual identity at school. Things like that can really contribute more to mental health problems and self-hate than other types of stress. All right, we're going to try to play this. And then if you can't hear it, Katie, let me know and I'll exit out. Maybe. Or it's not even going to play. That's fine too. Can you see this?
YouTube? I can see the YouTube window. Not hearing sound on that.
Okay. Oh, Microsoft Teams, what are you doing to me?
It has been discriminating against us all indiscriminately these 2 days.
It's not just trying to hate on the queer presentation?
Nope, it's all of them.
Oh man, it's a good video. Okay, I'll try to stop share and then I'll try to share again.
Yeah, when you share, Sarah, you have to choose like to share with sound. Like there's a box or something you have to check.
Yes, I finally found it.
Okay.
Okay, sound should work this time.
I was deeply afraid. I was
Gotcha.
scared and terrified. Just even if anyone found out about anything of who I was.
If I'm being honest, it was really stressful because you're kind of in this own little bubble where you don't know what to do, you don't know who to talk to about it.
Just anytime the question got asked, I would just be like, I don't really know, like whatever, and or just saying, oh, I'm straight, like cool, because it would just shut people up.
The rumors that you hear around the hallways and the things that people say in the hallways makes me feel unsafe at school.
When I did get a same-gender boyfriend, we were very out publicly, and that was when it felt like you had a target on your back. Sometimes just hearing footsteps behind you puts you on edge because you don't know if they're just running by or running at you.
I grew up in Brunswick, Missouri, which is a really small rural community. People would say, oh, there's a gay boy. I was stared at and looked at weird. As time went on, it even became like physical, where I would get like slammed into the lockers and stuff like that. And I had tried to go to the principal and stuff, but I never felt comfortable to really tell them.
One teacher I know, every day I saw her, she would tell me, don't be out here harassing those girls. And I just found it so inappropriate.
I had some teachers who would never call me Lucas throughout high school.
What right do you have to try and take away my identity from me? Why shouldn't I celebrate who I am?
Okay, so I know that not all of that may be completely relevant to your actual educational settings, but it's important to remember that a lot of kids don't have the experience of feeling safe within their own classroom environment. 64% of youth feel unsafe at school because of sexual orientation prejudice. 44% feel unsafe at school because of gender expression prejudice. And over 66% of them who experienced harassment or assault didn't report the incident because they felt like it would make things worse, or they felt like nothing would be done about it. Among GSD youth in schools, the school classroom has been described as one of the most homophobic and transphobic of all institutions. And especially in Southern and Midwestern states, kids report higher victimization and less access to GSD-specific resources. Just kind of as a survey among kids and GSD youth in schools, 71% reported hearing peers make negative remarks about sexual orientation and gender identity. 57% heard teachers make negative remarks about gender and sexual orientation. 82% are verbally harassed because of gender identity or sexual orientation, and 38% are physically harassed or assaulted. And keep in mind from that slide before, most of them aren't telling anyone when that happens because they're afraid that it'll either make things worse or that nothing will be done about it. So there are lots of things that we can do as individuals, as communities, to support inclusion, to support gender and sexually diverse youth, and support inclusion and within classrooms and just within interpersonal interactions. So the first thing that you can do, you're doing right now, and that's educating yourself. It's never the responsibility of the marginalized individual to educate you or to make you feel more comfortable. There's already too much stuff going on for the marginalized individual. That's not their responsibility. You need to educate yourself, and you're doing that now, and you can always do it kind of further with some of the resources and stuff within the packet and other webinars and series and stuff like that. Right now, the AMA has a really great gender and sexual orientation webinar series for free if you wanted to check that out. And just this finding is from healthcare specifically, but one of the most common grievances from gender and sexually diverse people is the lack of knowledge from their provider, or their provider expecting the client to educate them. So just to kind of reiterate, we need to educate ourselves, not expect them to do it for us. Next, self-reflection is something that as a social worker, I do a lot of, but I don't feel like it's really ingrained quite as much in other fields. And so we really need to take a step back and think about how our own identities and experiences with culture and diversity impact how our beliefs and biases may come out. And so it can be helpful to reflect on our own identities, and especially recognizing privilege and oppression within those own identities. So for example, I am white, and so I have privilege, and I am also, you know, a woman and a queer person, so I have oppression. And so I can have both at the same time, and I can have varying levels of oppression and privilege, but it's important to recognize that. And it's important to recognize it, especially if you've never kind of dealt with overt discrimination. And so like diversity training exercises like privilege checklists or Project Implicit might kind of help really hone in on what it is that your bias or beliefs might be, so that we can work on kind of reducing some of the negative bias. And again, we live in a society that is heteronormative and cisnormative. So that assumption is ground into us. We are socialized from that assumption from birth. And so of course it's going to be quite a process to kind of unlearn all of that. And so it's really a lot of self-reflection and thinking about how our own privilege and oppression and diversity has impacted us and our beliefs. So Project Implicit is a free project out of Harvard University that is designed to help identify implicit bias. There are all different forms of the Project Implicit tests, but there are some for sex and gender as well. So if you are, you know, working to make a more inclusive and affirming environment for your students or for the people that you interact with, I do recommend at least doing those. But the race ones and others are also very interesting. Learn a lot about yourself through them. So just some kind of questions that you can ask yourself in thinking about how your classroom or how your interactions and practice are inclusive. You can think about how those things impact your classroom overall. You can ask yourself what steps you can take to create a safe and inclusive learning environment for all students. And ask yourself how diversity is reflected in your curriculum and class activities. So do you have representation of gender and sexually diverse individuals? Do you have diversity represented through race and culture? Do you have those different things within your curriculum? Another thing, and this is really important, and it's also difficult, but also easy, if that makes any sense. It's as easy as it can be, but it's always difficult to make a language change. So using inclusive language, using gender neutral pronouns, or, you know, just terms to address groups of people, or instead of saying, you know, do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, ask, are you seeing anyone? Are you in a relationship? And normalize sharing pronouns, like I did at the beginning of this presentation. Hi, I'm Sarah. My pronouns are she and her. Hi, I'm Sarah. How do you want to be identified? What are your personal pronouns? And so those things are things that are relatively simple that can really just promote an affirming and inclusive experience for people. So I included this little graphic of a bunch of different fun gender neutral terms to address a group that you can use. Beautiful people is one that I use a lot. I like rad jazz cats. But there are a bunch of fun ones on here. So, you know, choose whichever one makes you feel good, or, you know, get creative with it. I think it's fun to kind of try to come up with things like this. Don't make assumptions, and if you don't know, ask. That's fine. If you make mistakes, that's fine. Acknowledge that it happened. Thank the person for correcting you, for being patient with you, and work to improve. Always listen and be compassionate. And some kind of general tips when working with gender and sexually diverse identities: don't overemphasize that identity if that's not something that is a concern to them. Provide accurate and inclusive information and education on gender identity and sexual orientation. Enhance social support and peer support. Provide support for their family, and make appropriate referrals to gender and sexually diverse specific resources whenever possible. So some of these, I don't know how applicable they'll be to your environment, because some of these recommendations are addressed more specifically at school systems, but I'm going to kind of go through them quickly because I am talking quite a bit and running a little bit out of time. But in order to kind of promote inclusion and enhance well-being, we have to make our schools and in classrooms supportive and safe environments. And so schools are complex social environments. They represent our communities, but we all have our own personal biases and beliefs, and school systems, again, are built from a heteronormative, cisnormative standpoint. And so there's a lot of barriers for gender and sexually diverse youth. And so kind of shifting to a trauma-informed lens where we're actively working to prevent re-traumatization, and coming at it from more of a what can we do to support you, and what can we do to make your experience safer and better for you. And so shifting from a kind of what's wrong with you framework to a what happened to you framework is the general approach we take in kind of trauma sensitive work. But it also removes the focus from individual fault to understanding how the experiences that an individual has impacts our behavior. And so if a kid is kind of withdrawing and becoming reclusive or isolating, you might want to think about, what happened or what's going on versus what's wrong with you? Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? Educators and administrators can create a safe school climate by working closely with the student to identify their needs, because remember, those are going to be different, depending on the individual. Supporting or developing a gender and sexuality alliance or a similar club that provides a safe space for GSD youth to get together. Developing and supporting inclusive curriculum that includes positive images of gender and sexually diverse individuals throughout history and events, and identifying yourselves as supporters and allies of gender and sexually diverse youth. That one actually is probably easier than even the language change, because you can do things like just hanging up a sign in your office that says, hey, I'm a safe space for you. This sign is in that packet if you wanted to print it out for your office. Or like having a little flag in your office, because that's fun too. Or like a little lapel pin here, it's a rainbow. Or if you've got lanyards, like most of the school systems, you can put some, inclusive stuff on your lanyard, just as little signposts and indicators that you are a person that is okay to talk to about gender and sexuality concerns. And having just one supportive adult in a youth's life has been shown to make huge differences in terms of resilience and protective factors and overall outcomes. So, again, because I'm not sure exactly how much you're kind of involved with administration and things on that level, but there should always be policies that are comprehensive about bullying, harassment, and those policies should specifically include gender identity and expression and sexual orientation. You should also have a communication plan. So what that means is essentially knowing who you can talk to about what about the individual. So if that student or if that youth, find out who uses what pronouns when they're talking to them. So like if you're talking to their family, you'll use these pronouns. If you're talking to their friends at school, use these pronouns. Things like that to make sure that we're not accidentally outing anyone or putting anyone in any kind of danger. And always, of course, as educators, I am sure you're aware of this, but all students' basic rights need to be upheld at all times. So that means access to bathrooms and locker rooms where they're safe, being able to use their names and pronouns, and being able to access other activities and everything that everyone else has access to. So as a community, even larger scale, there are also things that we can do to support gender and sexually diverse youth. Some of the needs that have been emphasized by gender and sexually diverse youth are housing needs specifically, because this was a homelessness survey, but access to transition services are cited as the most cited need for trans individuals. The providers that offer these services can be few and far between, especially those of you who are not around a large city or a metro. Enhancing peer support, which is why this gender and sexual alliance can be so important. It's so important to have access to people who share your identity, especially as a youth, especially as someone with a gender and sexually diverse identity. Providing access to affirming care, and again, enhancing social connection with the community at large. So just making sure that they're connected socially with others who share their identity and with others in the community. Family acceptance is the single biggest protective factor for gender and sexually diverse youth. And family rejection is one of the major contributing factors to developing the desire to die and to attempting suicide. So when working with families, we may need to help them adjust to the reality that their kid or their loved one does have a gender or sexually diverse identity. Sometimes this just means providing accurate information. Other times it may mean working extensively with the family to integrate their loved one's gender and sexually diverse identity with their beliefs in a way that doesn't cause significant distress or impairment. However, the end goal is always to enhance family support for the gender and sexually diverse individual. I included this resource on here, the Family Acceptance Project. It is from Dr. Caitlin Ryan, who has been doing work specifically around families and gender and sexual diversity for a few decades now. She's just fantastic. But they have a set of resources that are really good, both for general family work and information, but also for working with families who are conservative or otherwise kind of opposed to gender and sexual diversity and kind of not willing to accept or integrate that. So a lot of great resources there. Again, those are in your handout. And this is kind of a hot button issue right now, but trans athletes belong in sport. So this is like one of the arguments that I really don't understand is, well, let's give them their own league. But there are like 4 kids in each state who want to play one separate sport. And so that's just not feasible. It's just not feasible. But additionally, trans kids are already excluded from pretty much every aspect of life. Why would we want to exclude them from another one? There are people of all different levels of kind of development and ability and muscle composition and everything, regardless of their gender or assigned sex. And so kind of like focusing on this particular issue and sensationalizing it is doing nothing but telling trans kids and gender nonconforming kids that they don't belong and that they shouldn't even be here. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna kind of just do condensed versions of these. But the number one priority for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for this year is banning conversion therapy, because it is absolutely so incredibly harmful to people who go through it. I mean, incredibly harmful. There have been vast increases in suicide ideation following participation in a conversion treatment program. There are ongoing mental health problems after it. I mean, just like think about going to a summer camp and just like sitting there for all day, every day, being told that you as a person are wrong and can't possibly exist the way you are, and what that would do to your brain. Next, we need to promote statewide and federal protection for gender and sexually diverse individuals. Here in Kentucky, it's still legal for people to be fired or kicked out of housing or denied service based on gender and sexual identity. There are 15 cities within Kentucky that have fairness ordinances, but we really need to get it passed on a larger scale. I've got another video. Y'all know I was going to bring David Rose back.
Standing up here, it's hard not to think back to a very specific time in my life when I was still in the closet. I was in high school. I had a bad faux hawk because the first Mission Impossible movie had come out, and I thought Tom Cruise was a real drink of water. When I was falling in love with my best friend, and instead of being able to do anything about it, I watched him fall in love with someone else because I didn't have the courage to act publicly on my feelings. Thinking back to those formative days where I was missing out on all the good stuff because I was walking around with an invisible rain cloud over my head, smiling through the heartbreak so as to avoid anyone asking me what was wrong because I didn't have the strength to tell them. I think back to the bullying, the name calling, the shoving, the side eyes, a guy in math class calling me a faggot, but then also telling my 2 straight girlfriends that they were lesbians because we went to Lilith Fair and that we all probably had sex with each other on weekends. To which I replied, that theory has some serious logistical flaws. Doesn't make sense. I think back to that time where I legitimately thought that I would have to live with this secret, my being gay, for the rest of my life because I didn't have the security of seeing a lot of people like myself being celebrated in popular culture. I bring this up because when I was told that I'd be receiving this honor, I immediately went back to that place and asked myself, how did I get here to this place, standing in front of all of you tonight, an out and proud gay Emmy loser? And the answer was a 3-parter. I was supported by my friends at the time, a group of very strong, funny, dazzling young women who were the keepers of my secret and the protectors of my soul, never letting the threat of high school boys who didn't know how to process my closeted gayness affect my happiness. I was encouraged by my high school English teacher who, one day after reading a long-form poem I submitted in lieu of an essay, partly because I hadn't read the book, and partly because my brain has a hard time following the rules, told me that there was something special in my writing and that I should think about pursuing it. Up until that point, I hadn't even thought about being a writer. And lastly, I was loved. I was lucky enough to have a family that supported me fiercely and unconditionally when I needed it the most. When I came out at 18, and my sister Sara is here tonight. So, I didn't want to cry again. One bread roll for an entire day. It's not okay. Had I not had the support to build my courage, had I not been encouraged enough to find my strength, had I not had the love to give me a sense of security, I don't know if I would have found my way out of the closet, let alone create the opportunity for myself to tell stories on television that have affected some kind of positive change in the world. Support, encouragement, and love. 3 relatively simple acts of kindness that can change the course of a person's life. And yet, for so many members of our beautiful community, those simple, transformational acts of kindness aren't just an arm's length away. Almost 3/4 of LGBT youth say they are more honest about themselves online than in the real world. A national study found that 40% of transgendered adults have reported having made a suicide attempt.
All right. Well, again, I love David Rose. And I just think that that is the perfect kind of note to end on, is that support, encouragement, and love are really all that we need, all that kids need, and that you can absolutely be that one person in a youth's life that makes a difference and that can bring them full circle and make sure they survive adolescence, because it's a hard time for everyone. These resources are also in your PDF handout packet. I'm not going to go over them, just so that we do have a few minutes for questions. And always, you can always email me. sarah.m.williams@louisville.edu is my email address. And I'm going to stop screen sharing if I can figure out how to do that. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for listening, especially as I kind of started to ramble there at the end, because I saw that we were running out of time and I tried to get through those slides really fast. But thank you all for being here. I see some familiar faces. It's good to see y'all. What kind of questions do we have? Classification overload is, sorry, responding to George, is the primary issue I think that people have with the alphabet soup model. And so that's why the basic understanding of gender identity versus sexual orientation is important. And if we can remember everyone's names, sorry, I'm trying to read comments too. If we can remember everyone's names and remember that Timmy doesn't want to go by Timmy anymore now that he's 17 and he wants to go by Tim, and if we can remember all the evolutions of the Pokemon after they, have the necessary time and candy, and if we can remember all of these different things, then we can remember, that this person wants to use they pronouns because that is what they are inside. And I really just think that, well, it's just too much information is kind of a cop out. I'm not saying this to you specifically, George. I don't think you are saying that it is a cop out. I just think that we have a lot of information and it's always at our fingertips. And I mean, all of you all obviously have internet access, so accurate information is available to you. And so being able to discuss that, it's really the person's experience, and your experience. You're an expert on your experience, whatever that experience may be. So is the other person. And just kind of accepting that we can't possibly understand everything because we can't experience everything. I may have just gotten a little bit too abstract hippy dippy there for a second, but I just truly believe that if we care, we can do it. It just takes a little bit of extra caring sometimes.
I have a random question.
Yes.
What advice would you give people that work with other people in education that, despite having a love for education, have an inability or an intolerance towards various groups or various other situations that deviate from what they consider the norm?
Really, that implicit bias training will open eyes in ways that most things can't, in terms of just understanding how your experiences are actually impacting how you're behaving and how you believe. So if you could propose an in-service day that is specifically for those, or doing some sort of privilege tracking or things like that. And also, if you look at the Family Acceptance Project's resources for conservative families, that might have some useful like talking points as well. That is in the packet, PDF packet as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, folks? We've got about, well, we're wrapping up. Any burning questions? All right. Sarah, thank you. So did I cut somebody off?
Well, I was just going to ask real quick. I'm not going to take up everyone's time here, but Sarah, of course, like it's kind of rare that there's somebody like so out there as far as like their queerness and being, you know, like outspoken about it. Are you okay? I'm assuming if we like message you to, I'd love to pick your brain about queer theory and gender identity and a lot of that kind of stuff, just because I don't get that opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. Super queer, super out, because I needed a super queer, super out adult when I was a kid and I didn't have one. So I'm just going to be obnoxiously queer and wear like all the rainbow things all the time. And that's basically like my mission in life. So yeah, I'm absolutely to talk queer theory and everything.
When my kids ask me what my orientation is, I tell them aggressively gay.
I'm like, I'm as queer can be.
That's great. I appreciate that, Jared. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been so useful. I don't think we can do this type of training enough. Everything can get normalized and we can get more comfortable. It just takes time and exposure. And we appreciate you doing that.
50 years ago, we didn't have Chinese food restaurants in the States. Look at us now.
Exactly.
That was just a very random connection, but like it's true.
That's true. And you can let me know if this is not a good sign off, but it's one I love, my favorite food person. I know he didn't make it up, but Kenji Lopez Alt on all of his videos on YouTube always says, all right, goodbye, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. And that I think is a lovely way to say goodbye to everyone and all the people that you support. So thank you so much, Sarah. And I've got Sarah's contact information. You've got the packet of resources. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with me or directly with Sarah and get some education to your folks. All right. Thanks again, Sarah. And I hope you all, I look forward to you all joining us for the last session. Mr. D is a hilarious guy that popped up on the internet a few years ago with his made up words for spelling tests. And I love nonsense words, so I can't wait. It probably won't be all nonsense words. It'll probably be good, normal, funny, useful words, but I hope there's some nonsense. So please join us for that at 2:15. And also for our Student of the Year Awards. We like to recognize not only teachers and staff, but the students that are doing great things in these programs, despite any hurdles that they may have in their way. So thank you all very much, and we will see you at 2:15.